The scent of industrial-strength antiseptic, overlaid with the earthy, undeniable aroma of anxious dog and damp fur, was as much a part of Elias Eli Vance as the network of fine lines etched around his pale blue eyes. In the dim, flickering fluorescent light of a rapidly darkening Detroit evening, the old man moved with a surprising, almost silent economy through the echoing, cacophonous kennels of City Paw's shelter. His frame, though lean and slightly stooped with the weight of over 70 years, still held a whisper of old strength. A persistent, almost imperceptible limp in his right leg was the only overt sign of past injuries, a quiet testament to a history he never discussed. His hands, gnarled by time and labor, looking more like weathered oak roots than flesh, possessed a shocking gentleness as they expertly soothed the trembling, newly arrived mutt, a scrawny creature whose wide, terrified eyes mirrored a kind of primal fear Eli understood on a cellular level. He was the shelter's resident phantom, materializing before the city's first light streaked the grimy windows and vanishing long after the last staff member had locked up. He mended broken latches with salvaged wire, coaxed traumatized animals back from the shadowy brink of their fear, and scrubbed floors with a methodical patience that bordered on ritual. His particular challenge and quiet triumph was Blizzard, a magnificent, three-legged Siberian husky mix rescued from a horrific hoarding situation. Blizzard's low, rumbling growls and bared teeth kept everyone else, even seasoned handlers, a respectful distance away. Only Eli, with his low murmurs and unhurried movements, could elicit a hesitant tail thump, a soft sigh of contentment from the deeply scarred dog. Few at the shelter knew his last name. Fewer still harbored any curiosity about his life beyond these crumbling walls. To most, he was simply Eli, the quiet old volunteer, a fixture as worn, as familiar, and as comforting as the shelter itself. But City Paws, much like its most dedicated volunteer, carried the heavy burden of unspoken battles and a precarious future. Condemned by ambitious city planners, eyeing the valuable downtown real estate, starved of essential funds, its days were undeniably numbered. A grim truth that settled heavier than the pervasive November gloom over the city. Eli felt each tick of its fading clock like a familiar ache, a dull throb resonating deep within his chest, a quiet, mournful echo of a distant past where survival itself had hung by the most slender, fraying of threads. The sharp, authoritative click-clack of expensive Italian leather heels on the cracked, discolored linoleum floor heralded Councilwoman Evelyn Hayes' arrival long before her perfectly modulated voice cut through the shelter's usual symphony of barks and meows. Young, impeccably dressed, radiating an almost aggressive ambition, with a smile as polished and insincere as her glossy campaign brochures, Hayes swept into City Paws. She was trailed by a visibly uncomfortable young aide clutching a tablet and a local news crew, their camera light glaring harshly in the dim space. Her visit was a meticulously orchestrated public relations maneuver, not an act of compassion. Her stated agenda, delivered with practiced earnestness, to champion the unfortunate but fiscally necessary closure of the dilapidated, inefficient, and frankly, fiscally irresponsible shelter. This closure, she emphasized, would pave the way for a gleaming, modern, and importantly privatized animal control supercenter. Detroit deserves progress, not sentimentality clinging to the past, she declared, her gaze sweeping over the worn kennels, the peeling paint, and the hopeful, pleading eyes of the animals with a thinly veiled, almost surgical disdain. Eli was in a quiet corner, patiently attempting to coax a traumatized, rail-thin kitten, no bigger than his hand, to take a few drops of milk from a syringe. Hayes, deep in her monologue about fiscal responsibility, urban renewal, and her vision for a brighter Detroit, barely registered his presence, her stream of carefully crafted sound bites a jarring, metallic counterpoint to the gentle, almost inaudible murmurings Eli offered the tiny, shivering creature. "This facility," she continued, gesturing vaguely with a perfectly manicured hand, "is a relic, a drain on our city's precious resources. It's time for a fresh start, a clean slate." The insult, though ostensibly impersonal and directed at the building, landed like a physical blow, not just to the shelter's small, overworked, and passionately dedicated staff, but to the quiet, intrinsic dignity of individuals like Eli. He understood, better than most, that true value, the kind that couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet, often resided in the very places and people that relentless progress so easily and callously overlooked. The first cut had been made, sharp, public, and deliberately wounding. The battle to save City Paws ignited with a desperate, heartfelt flurry of grassroots activity. Hastily organized petitions circulated in local diners, bake sales held on windy street corners, and impassioned pleas made at sparsely attended community meetings. Small, brave acts of defiance against the official, coldly worded eviction notice now tacked to the shelter's front door. Eli, a man who instinctively shied away from public displays or pronouncements, was nevertheless a constant, quiet presence in this struggle. He was there, mending broken fences, both literal and metaphorical. His steady, uncomplaining labor, a silent testament to his unwavering commitment. He'd seen his share of lost causes before. He'd been an integral part of them, in landscapes far more hostile than this. Sometimes, he knew, you simply fought anyway, because the alternative was to let a part of yourself die. Councilwoman Hayes, however, clearly relishing the political spotlight, escalated her campaign with ruthless efficiency. Her polished op-eds, appearing in major city papers, skillfully painted the shelter and its supporters as sentimental Luddites, stubborn impediments to Detroit's shining, prosperous future. It was during one of Hayes's slickly produced, televised press conferences, where she confidently outlined the economic benefits of her urban revitalization plan, that Sarah Chin, a seasoned investigative journalist renowned for her fearless tenacity and her award-winning series, America's Forgotten Frontlines, first became aware of City Paws. She was initially, and somewhat begrudgingly, assigned a local color piece by her editor, a human interest story on the shelter's seemingly futile last stand. But as she walked through the echoing kennels, the pervasive sin of quiet desperation irrevocably mixed with an undeniable, almost defiant resilience, she felt a familiar, insistent pull, a journalistic sixth sense tingling. Her sharp gaze, trained to see beyond the surface, eventually fell upon Eli. He was in the small, makeshift infirmary, expertly improvising a delicate splint for a tiny, injured songbird with nothing more than a coffee stirrer, a strip of gauze, and a profound gentleness. There was a remarkable precision in his aged hands, a calm, unwavering focus in his faded blue eyes that seemed utterly out of place for a mere volunteer. It wasn't just inherent kindness, it was a practiced, almost surgical skill, an economy of motion that spoke of deep, ingrained training. A seed of intense curiosity, small but stubbornly persistent, began to take root in Sarah Chin's incisive mind. This old man, she sensed, was more than he appeared. Sarah Chin's journalistic instincts, honed by years of navigating bureaucratic mazes and uncovering deeply buried truths in war zones and forgotten towns, now hummed with a low, insistent intensity. Elias Vance. The name itself was unremarkable, common enough to fade into any background. But the way he'd calmly, almost nonchalantly, sutured a deep, ragged gash on a terrified rescued pit bull, using, of all things, a length of old fishing line he'd meticulously sterilized with hand sanitizer and a carefully heated needle, was anything but common. His hands, despite their age and the visible tremor that sometimes accompanied fatigue, had been as steady and precise as a seasoned surgeon's. This was far more than just an old man's accumulated resourcefulness. It was muscle memory, deeply ingrained. Sarah began to dig, her evenings consumed by scrolling through online databases and making discreet inquiries. She started with military records, a long shot, a journalist's hunch. Eli's apparent age suggested possible service, perhaps Korea, more likely Vietnam. But initial searches yielded nothing remarkable, just a common name with no distinguishing service history attached. Meanwhile, Councilwoman Hayes, buoyed by favorable polls and smelling imminent victory, confidently scheduled the final city council vote that would officially seal City Paw's fate. A palpable pall of despondency settled over the shelter staff and its loyal supporters. Eli, however, seemed to draw a peculiar, quiet strength from the animals themselves. His unwavering, gentle care, a silent bulwark against the encroaching, overwhelming despair. He'd once told a tearful young volunteer, struggling with the inevitable loss of a particularly sick, fragile puppy, "You do what you can, for as long as you can, with what you've got. That's all there is. The rest is just noise." Sarah, increasingly frustrated by digital dead ends, happened to be at the shelter when Eli, reaching to adjust a loose kennel door, pushed up his worn watch band. For a fleeting second, almost hidden by the weathered skin and faded with age, she glimpsed it. Two small, distinct, dark green inked feet. A PJ tattoo? Her breath caught in her throat. Pararescue. That others may live. The motto seared itself into her mind. Could this quiet, unassuming, limping volunteer, this tender of broken animals, truly be one of the legendary PJs, the Air Force's elite combat search and rescue specialists? The disparate pieces, once scattered and meaningless, began to click rapidly, powerfully into place. The city council chamber, packed to capacity, buzzed with a palpable, nervous tension. Reporters lined the walls, their cameras poised. Shelter supporters, many clutching handmade signs, filled the public gallery, their faces etched with anxiety. Councilwoman Evelyn Hayes, radiating poise and unshakable confidence, delivered a passionate, meticulously rehearsed closing argument for the shelter's demolition. We must be fiscally prudent, ladies and gentlemen. We must look to the future of this great city, not cling sentimentally to the relics of the past, she declared, her voice ringing with a conviction that brooked no dissent. Eli sat in the back row of the public gallery, a silent, stoic sentinel amongst the anxious shelter supporters, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the council members. As the weary-looking chairman picked up his gavel, preparing to call the decisive vote, Sarah Chen stood abruptly. "Mr. Chairman, members of the council, if I may have a moment?" All eyes, surprised, turned towards her. With a hesitant nod from the slightly bewildered chairman, Sarah stepped forward, her demeanor professional, her voice clear, steady, and carrying an unexpected authority. Councilwoman Hayes speaks eloquently of fiscal prudence and the importance of the future. I want to speak about a different kind of value, and about a past some would clearly rather forget, or perhaps never knew. She then, with compelling clarity, began to tell the astonishing, previously classified story of Staff Sergeant Elias Vance, United States Air Force pararescueman. She spoke of Operation Arctic Ghost, a top-secret Cold War mission in the unforgiving winter of 1973, a downed SR-71 Blackbird reconnaissance plane, deep within hostile territory. A perilous, high-altitude, low-opening, halo parachute jump into a raging Arctic blizzard with near-zero visibility. 3 survivors from the crash. 1, a critically injured, high-value intelligence officer, clinging precariously to life. Eli, then a young, determined PJ, not much older than some of the aides in that very room, single-handedly keeping them alive for 6 brutal, sunless days in unimaginable sub-zero conditions, improvising shelter, rationing meager supplies, performing life-saving medical procedures with minimal equipment, fighting off crippling frostbite and the crushing weight of despair, all while skillfully evading active enemy patrols. He had then, against all odds, led them to an almost impossible extraction point. Sarah paused, then projected a recently declassified satellite image onto the large screen behind the council, grainy, stark, but unmistakably showing 3 tiny, huddled figures around a makeshift signal fire against an endless expanse of white. Then, a second document, a heavily redacted commendation for valor, but with Eli's name and rank clearly, undeniably visible, citing extraordinary heroism, unparalleled medical skill, and indomitable spirit under extreme duress. A profound, stunned silence descended upon the chamber. Councilwoman Hayes' confident, polished facade visibly crumbled, her face paling. Eli sat where he was, his head slightly bowed, not in shame or discomfort, but as if instinctively shielding himself from a sudden, overwhelmingly bright light he had long ago learned to avoid. The air crackled with the unspoken weight of forgotten sacrifice and sudden, shocking revelation. The city council vote on City Paws demolition was, predictably, indefinitely postponed, amidst the stunned silence and then the ensuing chaotic murmur that filled the chamber. The incredible story of Eli Vance, the quiet, unassuming shelter volunteer, the decorated Arctic hero, exploded across local news channels within hours, then rapidly spread to national outlets, fueled by Sarah Chen's meticulously researched and compellingly written feature article. It was the kind of story America loved. Forgotten heroism rediscovered in the humblest of settings. Donations, both large and small, began to pour into City Paws from every corner of the country. Veterans groups, deeply moved, offered not just financial support, but also organized volunteer work parties to help with much-needed repairs. Councilwoman Hayes, facing a public relations inferno and, by all accounts, a sudden and profound crisis of personal conscience, issued a heartfelt public apology. It wasn't just for her aggressive handling of the shelter issue, but for her wider, systemic blindness. Some assets, she admitted in a widely televised interview, her usual polished confidence replaced by a raw, uncharacteristic humility. Some contributions simply cannot be measured in dollars and cents. We were wrong. Eli, true to his ingrained nature, steadfastly shunned the sudden, intense limelight. When persistent reporters managed to corner him, he'd simply nod towards the dedicated shelter, staff, or gesture to the rows of hopeful animals. They're the ones who need the help, the attention. He'd say, his voice raspy and quiet. I just cleaned the cages and walked the dogs. But things had undeniably, irrevocably changed. The way people in the neighborhood looked at him now, the hushed, almost reverent respect in their voices when they addressed him. The group of young toughs who used to loiter menacingly outside the shelter, occasionally catcalling volunteers, now sheepishly offered to help carry heavy bags of donated pet food or clear debris. The city government, once so eager to bulldoze city paws for prime development land, abruptly changed its tune. Influential council members, spurred by public opinion and perhaps their own awakened consciences, began serious discussions about fully renovating the historic building, preserving it not just as an animal shelter, but as a living landmark of compassion and now of astonishing, quiet heroism. The echoes of respect were tangible, a quiet revolution in a forgotten corner of the city. City Paws Shelter, snatched from the very brink of extinction, not only survived, but began to thrive in a way its weary staff had scarcely dared to dream. It became far more than just a temporary refuge for abandoned and abused animals. It transformed into a vibrant community hub, a tangible testament to the enduring, often hidden, power of quiet, selfless service. It stood as a place where a bustling city was reminded daily that true heroes often walk among us, unseen, unsung, their extraordinary valor etched not in grand stone monuments, but in the steadfast, humble dedication of their daily lives and unseen sacrifices. Eli Vance, of course, continued his volunteer work with the same quiet diligence as before, his limp perhaps a little more pronounced on cold mornings, his silence still a profound and comfortable cloak. But now, his very presence was a beacon, a source of quiet inspiration. Young volunteers, initially drawn by the sensational news stories, stayed, seeking his unspoken wisdom, not about the dramatic tales of Arctic survival, which he never offered, but about resilience, about the deep, intrinsic rewards of caring when it's difficult, when no one is watching. His extraordinary story, brought reluctantly into the light, inspired a city to look closer, to search for and value the other Eli Vances in their midst, the quiet souls diligently tending to the broken, the vulnerable, and the forgotten in the shadowed corners of their own communities. The enduring moral of Eli's story echoed not in grand pronouncements, but in the gentle, rhythmic swish of his broom, the soft murmur of his voice soothing a frightened animal, the unwavering steadiness of his gnarled, capable hands. True heroism isn't always a sudden, dramatic blaze of glory on a distant, frozen battlefield. More often, it's the unwavering, unglamorous commitment to simply show up, day after difficult day, for those who have no voice, no power, no advocate. It's the quiet, persistent courage to keep mending, keep caring, keep serving, long after the world has stopped watching, or indeed, if it ever noticed at all. Who are the Eli Vances in your neighborhood, in your life? What quiet acts of extraordinary courage, selfless compassion, and unwavering duty deserve to be brought into the warm light of recognition? Share your stories in the comments below, and let us together honor the unseen heroes who walk among us.